Hello, everyone. My name is Johnny Sloan, and for our missionary biography assignment, I chose to read The End of the Spear by Steve Saint. Um, Before this assignment, I didn't know who Steve Saint was, but I did, in fact, know who his family was and the events that surrounded kind of how he got started into the mission field. His father was Nate Saint, who was one of the men um, with Jim Elliot in 1956 in Ecuador, who got speared to death by the Waodani people, who were known as Alcas at the time, or savages. And so Steve was about 5 years old when this happened, and so you can imagine um, how crazy his life was beginning. That they were already living in Ecuador, kind of outside the jungle, and then his father and those other men got killed, and the Saint family faithfully stayed there, understanding how critical their mission was, and chose to still take the gospel to these people. And they made friendly contact. Steve and his family ended up moving into the jungle to live among these people. So Steve grew up with the Waodani people. He learned their culture, their language. He lived in the jungle, learning how to hunt with the other young men in the jungle. And his aunt was actually one of the ones who translated their language into a written language, or translated the Bible into that after having made a written language for them. But Steve's story really begins a little bit later than that. He left the jungle. He kind of went back into civilization, I guess you could say, to get an education, and he started a business, sold it, started a couple other businesses, and went actually very successful, and moved to Florida where he was living. But he remained in contact with the Waodani people throughout his life, and after his aunt died, he went down to the funeral services in the jungle, and the tribesmen asked him if he would consider moving back into the jungle with them to help them, um, to teach them how to adapt to all the changes that were coming their way. People were starting to come into the jungle now that this was a friendly tribe, and they weren't just murdering people left and right. And they didn't know how to deal with receiving gifts from the outside. They didn't know how. They didn't have a government necessarily. They didn't have an economy. They didn't have money. They just survived out in the jungle. And so Steve and his wife and his children moved back into the jungle. They moved out of their modern world in Florida, moved back to the jungle, and with the purpose of not only discipling these people, but also helping them to establish basically a society that could function with the world that was coming into them. And all of this was possible because the gospel had been taken to them. These people were, they had no rules, they had no laws. The only way they knew how to deal with conflict was to kill. And that's ended up how Jim Elliot and those guys got killed. But after the gospel was shared with them, and many of them came to know Christ, and radically their lives were changed, and they became a friendly people, and other people were able to come in there, is what allowed Steve to come in there, and other people. And so Steve and his wife and his children helped them to establish um, ways of dealing with the outside world that was slowly creeping into their world. And and during all that, part of the one of the biggest processes, or biggest challenges he had, was setting up some sort of uh, system that they had to go by, and that ended up being elders, not just elders in the tribe, but it was the elders of the church. It was the ones who were walking with the Lord the closest, and who were basing their decisions off of Scripture. And so when he helped them along that, and they got elders to over the church and over the village. It really helped them establish a way to move forward from them. And ended up one of the hardest challenges that Steve and his family faced was leaving the jungle after I had spent so much time and become so close to all these people. And then ended up, they took some of those tribesmen around the world to speak to other people. So I highly recommend this book. It was an awesome read. It's very exciting. It gives you a glimpse into the primal, primitive world of the jungle, and it's incredible to hear how Steve and his family stepped out of their comfort zone in like the most extreme way to go and to care for these people compassionately through the gospel. So thank you.